Okay, so today we're going to start evolution. We're going to start section 1, which is Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection. Natural selection got cut off my slides, so make sure you add that. So put the title in your notes. This one. So Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection. That's like one saying. My natural selection got cut off. Yeah, put this whole thing in your notes. That's the title of this first section. Okay, so today we're going to start talking about how Darwin started developing the theory of evolution. So I'm going to start with more of like a story. Remember, you only need to write down what's actually bolded. Okay, so you don't have to write anything down on this slide. But you need to pay attention. So then when you get to the bolded words and you write it in your notes, you're going to have some like background context, so that makes sense. Okay.
Did you write down all that?
All right, so our story of Darwin and how he had some first thoughts on evolution starts all the way back into the 1830s. So in 1831, the general consensus was people thought the earth was 6,000 years old. And then they also thought plants and animals were unchanging. So that means if I had a pet basset hound, my basset hound and all the other basset hounds out there were going to be the same. They didn't change over time, meaning like their ears didn't get any longer, their bodies didn't get longer or shorter. They were just the same. However, the first basset hound originated, it stayed the same for the entire duration of the species of basset hounds. And so Charles Darwin, he went on a sailboat mission called the HMS Beagle. And the goal of this mission was just to survey the coast of South America. Darwin's specific job was to collect biological and geological specimens. And so this mission lasted 5 years. And during that 5 years, Darwin collected huge collections of rocks, different fossils, plants, and animals. Now, when he was also on this boat for 5 years, he read a book called Populations, and this book actually proposed the Earth was millions of years old, not 6,000. And so this influenced Darwin's thinking, and it started to change the way he thought about these specimens that he was collecting. So when he was collecting different samples of rock and different fossils, by opening the door that the Earth is not 6,000 years old instead of millions of years old, that really allowed him to start thinking about, well, where did these come from? Why are they like this? And so it really changed his thinking. Now, on a side note, how old do we think the Earth is today, roughly? Yeah, 4.6 billion years old. Okay, so today, we think the Earth is roughly 4.6 billion years old. And so in 1835, the Beagle went to the Galapagos Islands, and while Darwin was there, he collected mockingbirds, finches, which are also birds, and then other animals. And he noticed that the islands seemed to have their own slightly different varieties of animals. So a finch on one island looked just a little bit different on the next island. And of course, that sparked some curiosity in Darwin. So he wanted to know why and how. So when Darwin collected his collections, especially of animals, he would preserve them intact, and then he sent them back to England, and a guy named John Gould classified them. So he would look at them and he would classify them. And he discovered that these Galapagos finches were different species, and they didn't live anywhere else in South America. And this is kind of a unique discovery. And so they also noticed that those finches closely resembled the mainland species. And that's super weird because the mainland and the islands have extremely different environments. And so normally you would expect animals on the mainland to be extremely different than animals on the island, but instead they were extremely closely resembling of one another. Okay? And species shouldn't be that closely to resemble, which sparked some more curiosity and some more interest for Darwin. So the fact that those finches were so closely resembling of one another caused Darwin to think that populations from the mainland flew to the Galapagos Islands, and then they changed after reaching the Galapagos Islands. And that was a new thought, right? Because at this time, the popular opinion was the Earth was only 6,000 years old, and plants and animals were unchanged, meaning that the general consensus was birds wouldn't fly from the mainland to the islands and then change on the islands. Okay. So it was a new thought. All right, so then Darwin continued his studies. So he continued looking at differences, especially between the finches. And he came up with this hypothesis. New species could appear gradually through small changes in ancestral species. And so the giraffe picture here, it's just a good, simple picture to kind of diagram what his thought was. So if you take the shortest giraffe and you call it the most ancestor of the species, well, over time, just small changes are going to occur. Until you have so many changes, it makes a whole new species, like in the case of the finches. Now, this was just a thought from Darwin, right? He was still super interested, super curious, and so he wanted to learn more. So he turned to pigeon breeders to learn more about different types of selection and how do you get certain traits in offspring. Okay, so Darwin went and he talked to lots of different pigeon breeders, and he learned that different breeds of pigeons, they have certain distinctive traits that also are present in offspring, okay? So such as like the large, dark tail feathers. And you can promote these traits by selecting and breeding pigeons with exaggerated traits. So let's say you want pigeons with the big, dark tail feathers. Well, you would choose 2 parents with the big, dark tail feathers to make more offspring with that trait. And so that process is called artificial selection. Okay? And you're just directing the breeding to produce offspring with whatever desired trait you want. Okay, so man or human, you're getting involved, right? You're purposely selecting for traits by deciding what's going to breed with what to get whatever offspring you're looking for. So because since humans are involved, do you see how the word artificial is used? Right, so you're manipulating what actually happens. Here are some other examples of artificial selection. The first one is dogs. So we've domesticated dogs from wolves, and we artificially select for distinct traits that we want to see in dogs. And some other examples are just with crops and produce. So here are different types of food we select for to come from mustard seed, and we do artificial selection with corn as well. So learning about artificial selection caused Darwin to think that if humans could change species by artificial selection, then what is stopping this from happening in nature? So that brings us to the idea of natural selection. So Darwin thought some competitors in the struggle for existence would be better equipped for survival than others. So those who were the better equipped would survive, and then those who were less equipped would die.